Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Sam Redston from the Naomi Milcom Foundation, and I'm really pleased you're able to join us for tonight's MTalk. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we meet and create, the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and the Yalukit Willam of the Greater Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and any elders who may be watching this recording after the event. I'm really pleased that we're able to have a night tonight hosted by Dexus, because Dexus have enabled our ability to use this extraordinary space. In December, we spoke with the City of Melbourne about our desire to expand the program as restrictions were lifting and the difficulty in finding places with enough capacity. And Rob Adams immediately pointed to this building and said, this is a building with a story and it would really suit the project. So we caught up with Dexus and we spoke to them about our intentions. And Peter McIntyre designed this as Melbourne's first high-level car park, and the top 2 floors were actually office spaces at the time. Then over time, car continued to be king, so the top 2 floors were turned into car parking. And so it's actually, for us, a very well-rounded story that we've now come in at a time where there aren't very many cars in Melbourne and repurposed this space to create a cultural platform for our season, which Melbourne loves and supports, of talks and events and activations, performances. And it's the perfect place, I think, for us to have this conversation about what is next for our city, here perched amongst the trees, looking across the rooftops, and in a place that's been repurposed. How do we imagine the future of our cities? And there's been a lot of those conversations from our collaborators about social housing, about energy, about infrastructure. And tonight, we're really looking at the workplace. And so Dexus have a consulting arm called 6 Ideas, who've just completed a major research piece in the Asia Pacific region looking at this exact topic. And so I'd now like to introduce Andrew Mackenzie, who will moderate the conversation and introduce our speakers. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sam. We have an interesting night tonight. We have 4 speakers. The format will be each will talk quite briefly for 4 or 5 minutes, raise a few specific points, and then we'll get into a discussion afterwards, followed by Q&A. And I've got a feeling there are some reasonably authoritative figures out there in the audience tonight, so we will be looking forward to some good questions from the audience. Before getting into introducing each of the speakers, I thought I'd just put a little bit of context together around tonight and next week's talk, the second in this series, looking at the impacts of the last 12 months on the city, both short-term, medium-term, and long-term. And maybe anecdotally, just to start by saying, when I talked about this with Sam and we worked out what it might be, he was working late in the office and I was sitting around a campfire with a glass of wine. And I think, in a funny way, it's a kind of a moment where you realize that we're all finding different ways and different places to be productive in our lives. We are finding ourselves working in all sorts of places that we didn't used to work. And because of that, that has some potentially very big impacts on our cities. It's important when we start to kind of refresh our memory around how elastic and changeable and different and variable cities can be. We tend to kind of like get slightly locked into one view of having lived in Melbourne or Sydney or wherever for some time, and that becomes a kind of a fixed entity. But we forget the fact that we have a long history of very diverse, different ways of making cities, right the way from the densest city right now in the world being Tokyo with 33 million people in one continuous conurbation, which is, as a mark of curiosity, 1,000 times, almost exactly 1,000 times bigger than Ebenezer Howard's version of the Garden City, which he idealized as being around 32,000 people as being an ideal volume for a city. Both those cities, of course, share a common characteristic of being radial and therefore having a perception of a center. Melbourne certainly has a perception of a center, but there are plenty of cities around the world that don't, either deliberately or by some misfortune. We all know that many of the cities in America were hollowed out throughout the 40s, 50s, and 60s due to ghettoization and white flight and other factors that pushed people out to the outsides of the cities. And the city centre became a fairly kind of hollow experience in many of those cities. If we look at London, of course, has had at least 2 cities. If you think of the capital city being the business centre, the beating heart of business in London, and then the West End, which is the kind of entertainment heart. Two very different, distinct cities, both in the one metropolitan region. And of course, only 3 years ago, Lucy Turnbull announced that Sydney would be a city of 3 cities. The harbour city, the middle city around, the centre city around Parramatta, and the western city around Badgerry Creek. And so that's obviously very different from a radial city model. Now, I guess I bring this up because for 2 reasons. One is that we need to remember that cities do change and evolve over time. Melbourne certainly went through many evolutions. It was founded as a European colony, at least, as a gold mining city. It was a vibrant, living city where everything happened in the city. And then there was the banking crash in the 1890s, which took decades to recover. The city emptied out, further emptied out by the widespread arrival of cars, which meant that everyone lived outside of the city. And by around the mid-1980s, there was a mere 2,000 people living in the city. And of course, many of you will know that lots of initiatives, including Melbourne 3000, then brought all that life and diversity back to the city. But it's a small recap that even one city can live multiple lives and be multiple different things. In that context, the events of the last year remind us all that everything can change very quickly, and that things that we think are locked in concrete can be turned upside down almost as if overnight. That's both a challenge, and it can be very challenging for some segments of the community, but it's also an opportunity for those of us who work in and around the built environment to seize that moment where all of a sudden, all of us, whether we're workers or whether we're being entertained or whether we live in the city, we all have suddenly a slightly different view of what might happen in the city. So in that context, that's a very kind of brief context to place on a couple of conversations to look at what the last year might mean for Melbourne, a city which, as of last year, as of 2 years ago, 50% roughly of its daily population was workers. So that's why we thought, let's kick off with a conversation around work, and let's have an idea as to whether that is really going to radically transform, only slightly transform. I've got a feeling amongst our speakers tonight, we will get some diversity of views on that, and I will be very happy to take your questions later. So we have 4 speakers tonight, and I'll introduce them more fully just before they speak, but just to quickly run through them, we have Jared Tynan, who is a senior associate at Hassel. We have Jill Garner, AM, as of this year, who is the government architect of the Office of the Victorian Government Architect. We have Daniel Quinn, who's a principal at 6 Ideas. And we have Brenna Spain, who is from Deloitte Digital. So I'd like to kick off with Jared. Please, can you give us your 4 to 5 minute quick thoughts?
Yes, thank you. So I have to admit, I'm still recovering from the slight heart attack I saw when Jill pulled out her laptop, and I thought I don't have my slide deck, thinking that I was supposed to do some kind of presentation I hadn't actually prepared. So luckily, I get to cut it a bit shorter. So I come from Hassel, which is a design firm that specializes in architecture, interior design, urban design, landscape, and we do strategy and research. And strategy is the area that I'm in. My background is architecture, and been working in workplace design for about 20 years. So it's been a really interesting time. With strategy, it's been a focus for about the last 10 years, sorry. It's been an interesting time the last year if you're in that workplace and strategy space because we're all basically in one giant experiment, or we were for the last year. And one of the things that, as you were reflecting on that list, it is that notion that it's going to continue to be experimental. Like, we're going to have to be testing new ideas to figure out what the future is. If I sat here and told you this is what the future is going to look like in 5 years, I'd be lying. No one really knows that. And we're going to be trialing new ideas. And some of them are going to work and other ones won't. As through the last year, we've been doing a lot of discussions with various clients, and I actually just wanted to put some parentheses around the perspective that I bring around work, which really, when we talk about work, we're really thinking about white-collar work, office work. We don't really get into the notion of retail work, and it's not to diminish that work, it's just that's not the focus when we talk about work. So in terms of that workplace design and strategy, we've been talking to clients about what all of this means for them, what their experiences have been, what they see the future being like. And categorically, what we can say is there's not a consistent theme. Some people have adapted really well. Other people have really struggled. Other people see a new future way of working. Other people are really looking forward to going back in some way to the old ways of working. Through the process, later this year, we did a survey of about 800 workers, and we wanted to get their sentiment around how were things, what did they see the future being, and some models around different ways of working. So this has been speculated across various groups and organizations about what the future could look like. So there are organizations that are saying, we've been working without a physical office for a while, and we think that's the future. There are other people saying, we're all going to go back. In fact, we're all going to go back into cubicle offices because that's going to prepare us for the next pandemic. I think we can categorically say that neither of those is probably right for everyone. We've also been testing some other models with organizations that look at alternative matrix-style offices, which are a hybrid of both physical and virtual. And those are from things that are basically what looks like an ABW, for those of you that are familiar with that term, the activity-based working, but a bit more aggressive, to models that actually start to become more of a clubhouse. And so the office is an embodiment of the brand and culture and all of that. It's not so much about a sea of desks. And we've tested those ideas. When we did the survey with staff, one of the things that we found was that the virtual office was categorically seen as not favorable. People did not like that as a notion. The other one is that a lot of people talked about the notion that the CBD was going to die because we would actually decentralize the offices, and so that would mean that people could have easier commutes, and we have just not seen any evidence that either people find that desirable or that organizations find that desirable. And I think one of the things when we think about what's next in the future, we have to think about how we got to where we are. So today doesn't happen by happen chance. It's a sequence of decisions based on economic systems, psychology, culture, all of these things. So that kind of got us to there. So there is the potential for great change, but we also have to think about it through that filter of what's realistic and how did we get here, and what's the likelihood that we're going to radically change the thinking that got us here. I think that's a good starting point.
No one fit for all then. Jill, when we spoke the other day, you mentioned that right the way back from your early days, having a studio in the city, and then over the years, you were a deputy architect, government architect, now you're a government architect, many years working in the city. You've seen quite a few changes. Would you like to lead us into your experience of working in the city?
Yeah, and in fact, I think I'm going to talk less about the workplace and more about the city as perhaps a business, cultural, residential enterprise, because in a way that's what I care about a lot. And I was really going to put a few personal experiences down, because more than a year ago I was asked to present a talk in Hong Kong about Melbourne. And there was a lot of interest in how on earth Melbourne had become one of the world's most livable cities. It's hard for a 20th century city to have got that mantra, and how it had achieved this label of a city of quality, cultural quality and value. And the way I talked about Melbourne is I looked at Melbourne through my own eyes of having watched it over, and I was really horrified to realise it's more than 4 decades since I was at university. And I guess what I realised that I've watched Melbourne slowly build up its commitments and its qualities. And it's really been, if you call 40 plus years a long, slow climb, then it has been just that. And I've recently come to the conclusion over the last year that maybe the city's a little more fragile as an ecosystem than I really would have thought it was going to be a year ago. And a couple of recent events that I've been to has highlighted a couple of important moments for me in Melbourne's, what I'm calling a really slow upward climb. Last week, I went to a memorial service for the wonderful Peter Crone, one of Melbourne's very important architects from the 70s, 80s, 90s, etc. And there were several personal stories from friends, and they reminded us of the way that the 1970s in Melbourne it was a time when architects found and filled the spaces in the inner city that only architects and only artists and only those who might be considered creative found enticing. So there were those empty heritage buildings, the old inner city factories, the decrepit terraces. It's really hard to remember how radical that was in the 70s. Then last week at John Wardle's A.S. Hook address, in talking about his own personal history and those events and people who've impacted his own architectural journey, John acknowledged the role that being at university at RMIT in the central city with its teachers had actually played in his own life, and in introducing him to the secrets and the sort of passions that might be found in the city. Again, it's really hard to envision this as an unconventional thing to learn, but it really was at the time. And both of these discussions were a really poignant reminder to me of the slow, gradual ascent of Melbourne as part of my own life. Like many others of my generation, I've not just watched, but I've grown up in Melbourne, and as I've grown up, I've taken part in these 4 decades, four plus decades of really quite extraordinary change. So, you know, I was a child of the 60s, a teenager of the 70s, and grew up in an expanse of single houses, gardens, in a pioneering era when we had great new world enthusiasm for the car. And I would be put into my best dress and I'd be driven into town and I'd go to the doctor, to the dentist, to a theatre, and we parked here in the King's Parkade. This is where we came, and I went to Collins Street to go to my eye doctor or my dentist. So the city was a place of commerce and it was a place of business, maybe of specialised services and slightly rarefied entertainment. So like Wardle and like Crone, I only started to engage more deeply with the city when I went to university. And Melbourne has the privilege of universities embedded in the city, and the impact of that just can't be overstated. It's such an important quality. So the School of Architecture I went to at RMIT was in an old empty factory in central Melbourne, and we were introduced to the city as a place that we might live, we might work, we might play there. Once again, it's really hard to understand how that idea was so new to us as children of the suburbs. And while our schools of architecture were 24/7 hotbeds of discussion and, argument, etc., as soon as we left our campus, we hit the city, which was empty. Empty at 5 o'clock, and it stayed, particularly 5 o'clock on a Friday, and it stayed empty till 9 o'clock on Monday morning. So there's many of us who've actually been immersed in these last decades in Melbourne, in this evolution as it's blossomed from a place of really constrained 9-to-5 commerce into a place with a really demanding and creative population embedded in a meaningful business, residential and creative culture. So I have to admit to being a little horrified by the implications of the past year. While I hear great enthusiasm for the concept of changes to the way that we might work and that sort of sugar hit of not having to get out of our pyjamas in the morning, I really worry about what I call the unintended consequences of this, because no amount of pop-up activation is going to solve issues of empty commercial buildings, and too high rents will never allow creatives to occupy our city. They will always go elsewhere. I worry also about our fabulous public transport system that I am so vocal about and that I religiously catch everywhere in lieu of driving. At the moment, our trams and our trains are empty and our roads are once again really busy, and there's one person per car, and our community seems to have dumped public transport, and I'm worried that we're watching a return to our 1960s commitment to the car. So I'm worried that this really slow, steady 40 years of change that have actually made Melbourne what it is right now, I'm worried we're going to lose it in some way, and I feel a little like we've crawled our way to the top of the snakes and ladders board, only to be met with that snake, you know, the one that happens before you hit the finish, and you go all the way back to the beginning. Thank you.
Crikey. Well, we'll come back to that one. Thank you very much. It does remind me, I have to say, of my experience of London in the 80s, parts of London, with the same moment of cheap, like Old Street, for instance, or everything was cheap, full of artists and architects, and then all the rents went up, and then they moved out further and further, and how you prevent that endless cycle is a thing I think we'll come back to. Daniel Quinn, so you're principal at Six Ideas, and the company has been involved in the work environment for many years. You've worked in many different countries. One area of expertise, I guess, is in change management and work management, how things can be, how you can manage change well. Well, I guess there's never been a bigger change, at least in the recent history, than what we've seen in the last 12 months. What are your learnings from the last 12 months, and what do you bring to that question?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I'm going to take it back to workplace, and I'll try not to go over too much old ground, but I'll give some different perspectives, and then try and make a connection to the city as well. I do agree with what's been said so far in terms of we don't know what's going to happen definitively, and if people are telling you they do, I think they're telling fibs. It's an evolving story, and as Jill said, it's also a change that's been happening for a long time, but it's an acceleration of change. So I want to, in that context, draw on some research we did last year. Similar to the Hassel research, we did a study during the peak of COVID to find out what people's experiences of work from home environment and what their preferences were for the future. Now, I'm sure you've all seen quite a number of these, and I'm not going to spend tonight going through the stats. I just want to pull a couple of points out and throw them out there for some discussion. But just for scale, the survey was about just over 7,500 employee respondents. There was 153 executives who responded from a decision-making perspective, and it was across a bunch of industries, and it was limited to Australia and New Zealand because we really wanted to make it relevant to this context. We didn't want to dilute it across a bunch of countries. So we did that survey, and the key thing that came out of it, what people told us, was that they wanted to work in a blended way going forward. By blended way, what I'm talking about is they want to spend some time at home and they want to spend some time at the office. And that's because in the survey they said to us, we actually like working at home. And Jill referred to the pyjamas. People do like doing some things at home. They enjoy the experience of working from home as distinct from the experience of COVID. But massive numbers of people miss the workplace. And I'm talking, in our survey, it was 79% of people. Nearly 80% of people said they missed their office or their workplace. And I mean, you've seen the survey, so there's a lot of commonality across the surveys. What they said they missed is not going to surprise you. They missed the professional contacts. They missed the interactions. They missed the nutting out those complex, collaborative programs. They missed the learning and development. They missed being seen. It was quite different depending on where you were in your cycle. Certainly, younger people were saying, actually, we want to be in the office. We want to learn. We want to get mentored. We want to be seen. We want to build our career. Whereas people in different states had sort of slightly different takes on But the key thing across the board, across all those industries, across those large numbers, was that people wanted a blend, and they wanted those, they wanted the best of both worlds, if you like. And what did that blend look like? Well, people said they wanted to work in the office more than they, and this was this 80% figure. They wanted to work in the office more than they wanted to work elsewhere. Just a little bit. And the common thing was around about this 3-2 arrangement. And they wanted to come in and get those things that they talked about. Nobody said to us, what I really miss about my workplace is sitting at my desk, checking my emails or doing my invoices or doing some other individual tasks. What they wanted to do was come in and interact with other people. So from a city perspective, good news, I suppose, for this perspective, people they still miss their workplaces, and they want to come into the workplace more than they want to be somewhere else. The other side of that coin, the bad news, is I don't think we can take it as a given. It's not. We need to make a compelling picture about coming to the office, a compelling argument about what it can do for you. It's not about having parties. It's not about putting in table tennis tables and all that sort of stuff. That's not what people are missing. They want to get that interaction piece. So if we don't grasp this opportunity and think about what that means, and people roll up and they see the acres of cubicles, and we try to shoehorn them back into what was before, then we're going to fail. So it's a huge opportunity to sort of rethink, and we're working with a lot of clients that are already going down this path. There's a lot of people who are still sitting on their hands waiting to see what happens with others. But it's, as people explore, they're going, all right, which bits work where? How are we going to do this? How are we going to set it up? And people see, a competitive advantage in this. And I think the goalposts have moved a little bit. As an employee, there's a new currency, Organisations are going to respond to this in different ways, and you're going to start thinking, all right, well, who works for me? What does that mean for me? So I think that's a really important point. There's a bit of disrupt or be disrupted in this. And I think the last point is, yes, it's not going to be the same for everybody. It's going to be a very different experience. So it's about understanding your people and your business and how you might work and how that all comes together. Not looking for some silver bullet that's just going to pull it together for you. So I suppose to wrap that back together, what did we find? We found that people want to blend. We found that people actually want to be together with their workmates more than they want to be just at home by themselves. But we do need to make a compelling argument, and I think that goes to the city as well. I think having people on the doorstep by nature of them coming to work every day is not a given either. So compelling is a situation that's going to have to be applied at various levels, and it needs to be tailored to each group.
Thank you very much. So Brenna, you work at Deloitte, and you have recently done some research on kind of working aspirations within Deloitte, within the digital team. And at the same time, you're moving into you have just moved into new offices. In some ways, we're here talking about what might be the future in 5, 10, 20 years of the city and the work life of the city. You will be living that life for the next 10, 20 years. Could you tell me a little bit about what your aspirations or what you learned from the recent research you've done on what aspirations are for the young and emerging kind of young professionals within Melbourne?
Yeah, definitely. So, speaking from my own personal experience and the team that I work in, we have a large group of very young millennials in our team, and it's a big split of senior people that are more advanced in their career and have the kids at home and they've got their property that they've invested in. And then we've got a large group of young, more junior people who, are kind of new into their career and they're living in inner city Melbourne and they're, maybe their second or third rental property. And I think their priorities have completely shifted, and mine as well, in terms of what their home life is like, what they need from their workplace. And it's now suddenly a need for people of my age to now have a home that does cater to those workplace needs that you didn't need to worry about before, and also a workplace that did understand that, we can't afford to be spending nothing on a property anymore, because you need to have flexible working styles that also cater to face-to-face and working remotely. And also I found that despite there being a large shift from, working completely remotely to in the office, I think everyone's expecting there to be quite a culture shock in terms of, not seeing people face-to-face and having to collaborate. And it's interesting to see how happy everyone is and how everyone so quickly adapted. So that was something we didn't anticipate. We didn't anticipate people to go so quickly back to normal. But yeah, and I think mostly from our experience, it's not all about being flexible, but also just understanding that there is going to be a huge shift in what people in my generation will need, and workplaces will need to cater to what they need and be flexible, because they are the future, and we're not really going anywhere anytime soon, and it's going to need to start to pick up in terms of I think everyone's taking on new roles, people aren't staying in their same roles, and yeah, they're going to need to start understanding that millennials' priorities are constantly changing. But yeah, and it's interesting to see how the more senior people in our team are loving the home life, and they're loving having their time and their lifestyle flexibility, and it's completely different on our side.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so I think we've got a reasonably broad territory here to have a conversation. And I guess I'd like to start with some of the kind of bigger factors and then kind of work down into a little bit more detail. If we think about big factors, and I guess looking at the city as a whole, again, before last year, the daily population was around 50% workers. If we were to look at a model of 3-2, then that's a 40% reduction in occupation, which is a 20% reduction in daily population. That's quite a big hit for the city. What do we think? What's going to happen? Are we just going to have vacancy for that 20%? Are we going to find other ways of using that 20%? If that was indeed the figure, how is that going to impact the occupation of the city? Because that essentially could mean a 20% drop in the population of the CBD. But what are our thoughts around what could fill that gap, or how we could change the city to deal with that, other than large-scale vacancy?
I personally don't think we actually will see levels that are consistently that high. As we kind of mentioned, it's going to be different for everyone. So there will be buildings that potentially have occupants who are coming in 3 days a week. There might be some who are coming in a little bit less. I'm working with a client right now where they were really interested in understanding what flexibility looks like. And when we went in and we surveyed about a third of the organization, it turned out flexibility for them was actually being able to work from home 1 day a week. So I think we should put that in perspective. A lot of the kind of doomsday scenarios are probably a bit too aggressive. That said, I think you will have a situation where there will be some vacancy, and that will cause a shift amongst the real estate market, particularly with clients going to quality buildings. That will leave some buildings that need to find new purposes.
Can I might jump in there. I agree. I don't think we're talking that there's this 20% hole in the workplace. What we found is the workplace is just as important as ever, but it's important for different reasons. So the patterns will change. And I go to some of the points you made. What we found, and I talked about it as I went through, there's different requirements at different stages of development. So while we said junior people, or millennials particularly, who are often living in circumstances, they're in a share house or they don't have that environment home, they want to come in for that. They also, like the social stuff, and they want to come in for that. And they want to be seen, and they want to be promoted. So the workplace and how it's used will turn into something different, I think, rather than just leave these gaps. And as people get used to it, there's a real chance that the mobilities won't be in these blocks that we can mentally put. But depending on your commutes and you'll come to do the things you need to do, and you won't come at different times. So you can create that buzz around with good design, good operations, but it'll be used all the time, but just differently.
Yeah. What's interesting with this is that a lot of the things you're saying about the things that people are attracted to working together with their peers, professional opportunity, the social opportunities, these are undoubtedly factors of working in a work environment of some sort. But I guess what I'm interested in is the distinction between a centralized CBD and other city models where you have the distributed model, and of course what that means for transport. Because Jill, you mentioned that we've had this long haul towards a use and uptake of public transport. Clearly, the kind of car usage we've seen in the last 12 months can't continue, or at least we can't return to work in full capacity with the same level of car use. So there's two options there. One is that people get back on public transport, or there's a distributed pattern. So another general question is, okay, we do return to work in some capacity, but is that back in the CBD? Or do we see an uptick in Preston and other kind of 20 minutes out of the city where, in a sense, nobody likes to commute, do they? I don't think anybody likes to commute. So is there a question there around, yes, return to work, but maybe not as much in the CBD?
I suppose there's a couple of things there. I think what we have seen as well in workplace, if I step inside the buildings over the last few years, we have seen less and less space per person. And partly that's because our technology is so small these days. When we first started using computers, we needed L-shaped desks and, huge amount of space for our computers. And we are really quite compact, and we're able to bundle up our workplace in a way into a briefcase and work anywhere, which is kind of great. So I suppose one of the things that it will do, if you look at it mathematically, numbers-wise, there has to be less people around. Like if we're only working 3 days out of 5, then clearly the city will have X% more people in it, less people in it, than it would have had if we were working to the capacity that existed previously. And I do think there will be empty buildings. And I don't think we've got an economic environment that allows those buildings to be occupied in the way that they were in the 70s by creatives. So, we've got an economic environment that looks at what rentals are possible, and some landlords prefer to keep their buildings empty than tenant them at cheap rents. So I do think that's a real challenge for the city to any spaces, even if it's 10% of spaces. If they're empty, it's not good for a city. As far as the workplace goes, the things that you find in your survey and that feedback, in a way, they do neglect to step outside the door of the office. I mean, they may well have had questions associated with that too, but, what of dropping into places like this after hours? If you're working in a CBD in Box Hill, then Box Hill will have to develop as a kind of a microcosm of cultural offer in the same way that Melbourne CBD has. And Sunshine will have to develop that. If there's going to be a working hub in, if we look at the radial train line that's being talked about, if each of those station precincts becomes a little mini CBD, if you like, then there'll be activity and there'll need to be cultural activity. Unless people only go to work to see each other and kind of get a bit of contact. But I think what I'm so convinced of is that over the last 40 years, Melbourne is bigger than that. It's not just a great workplace. It's actually an incredible city for stuff that goes on. So in a way, if we're going to have satellites that satisfy individuals to work in those satellites need to very carefully cultivate their own cultural kind of identity and enterprise as well, so that they're more than just a place for people to go to work and see people. So I think there's a challenge there, because is our population big enough for that? It probably is, because we've got a big city, big growing city. But I guess probably my story just points to the fact, you talked about a donut city, Andrew, and I do think Melbourne was a donut city when I was at university. Absolutely no question. There were no international students. There was no occupation of the city. There was 200 people living in the city, not thousands. And it was a complete donut. And I think the danger, how do we make sure that absolute love of being in this place extends beyond the workplace to what happens in the streets, what happens in the restaurants, what happens at the arts centre, what happens here in this car park. So every place where there is business enterprise needs business, fun, cultural events. We need to live there, we need to work there, we need to play there. So it needs all of those, needs to tick all those boxes that make a city great or make a working. Otherwise we end up with office parks.
Yeah, it's that compelling connection. I think it's the same whether you're talking cities or you're talking workspaces. It's compelling. I know you move on, but Andrew, 2 points there. What we're seeing from our research is that whole thinking about distributed or flexible or whatever you want to call it, workplaces is an evolving story. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's no clear trends in that at this point in time. But I think one of the things that we shouldn't overemphasise at the moment is people are still worried about things related to the virus. So public transport is down because people feel safer in their cars. I think over time that will change, and we still have transport systems that deliver well into the cities.
Did you want to pick up on that?
I just have one last point on that about why a distributed city may not necessarily be the easy solution. And it's really a real commercial thing. When you talk to organizations, they are under real pressure, and real estate is one of those places where they see the squeeze. If you're talking about the future of the office is really about collaboration, it doesn't really make sense economically to duplicate that in multiple places when you can actually bring that together, get the vibrancy, get the efficiency, all of those things. So I think, going back to those entry remarks I made about you have to remember some of the decisions that got us to the current state where we are. So I think you can't forget about that.
Would you say that applies equally to the small to medium size, or are we only talking kind of blue chip at that point?
I think you are definitely talking about organizations of a scale. Definitely.
Brennan, I was going to ask you in that conversation around separating the two things, the work environment coming together and all the things that come being in a workplace versus the location of that workplace, and ask you whether, as a sample member of the working public in Melbourne, how important is it for you to be in the CBD? If Deloitte's maybe not the best example, because they do need to be centralized probably, but if you were working in a company that established a very nice building somewhere 20 minutes out of the city, is that a proposition if, as Jill says, there was a richness built around it, wasn't just a workplace, it was a cultural place, there was an understanding of what you had to pull together? does that have a cooey of a chance of being something that you would think about as being attractive, or is there something just dynamic about the CBD that will never be replaced?
No, I think you're definitely right, Jill. I think exactly that. If you need to have the culture around there, I think now people are coming to the city more. There's more to do afterwards, and there's more opportunities to see other people. But if you had that thing to do, that cool place to be in and around your workplace, you're only going to be more drawn to that area. It's funny, I do lots of the events and stuff for the team, and we do big client events, dinners, and all that schmoozy stuff. And if in the past it was always city or nothing, like find me a place that's a city, can't be anywhere out the city. Carlton, too far. Richmond, way too far, ridiculous. And now since COVID, I found, I live in Abbotsford, and people are like, oh, have you heard of this place called Podreggy in Abbotsford? And I'm like, yeah, get out of my suburb. Like that's where I live. And so they're now, pushing big client meetings out into these, inner little pockets in the inner city, which before would be like, where's Abbotsford? I don't, and I found that they're more comfortable, and clients are much more eager to try new places outside and not go to that same old Italian restaurant in the city that, they've always loved. And I think, they're edging closer to that possibility. And I think if there was more of that spread of a culture outside of the city, people are going to love to be in those areas. And it's something new, it's not stale, it's different.
I guess the only danger with it is that issue of, how long does it take a city? I guess that's my point really about Melbourne. We have to have a very, very long-term tolerance, if you like, of the idea of growth, because any city worth its while is full of layers. It's not, you cannot design a city. One developer can't just do a master plan and say, right, I've built a fabulously functioning city. It needs those layers of, if I call it architectural history, and kind of history of occupation and history of cultural enterprise. And I am not always convinced you can do that within 10 years. I think it takes a really long time to build that up. So I think that's going to be the challenge for Melbourne. It's probably inevitable, and we just need to be patient, but the infrastructure needs to be there. And maybe the rail line is the start of a great idea for that to start happening.
Okay. I will go to questions in a moment. I know we are running, but I got two other questions I desperately want to ask. So, Brenna, a lot of what we were talking about is the pull into the city, and the experience of last year of wanting to get back into the city. But I also wanted to talk briefly about the push, which is the circumstance in which you live. And, older farts like myself, you're in a house, you got your own room, you think, what's wrong with working at home? I close the door and I got a nice view, and da-da-da. But my younger colleague, is in a share house and trying to work out how to have a proper confidential meeting in a share house. So I guess there's a question around not only how do we adapt the office environment, but whether this is also a question around the residential environment. And I ask in case there might be a residential developer here as well. But the idea that maybe this great thing we've been always talking about, architects have been talking about forever, the adaptability of a home, so it can do lots of things. It can be intergenerational, but it can also be somewhere that you work. Is that part of the picture, that if you simply had a better home environment where you could actually work properly, that would change the equation around the 3-2?
Yeah, definitely. When lockdown hit, I was in this 6-bedroom house in Carlton, 1 bathroom, 1 living room. We've all lived in that house, just damp and it's tiny, and we had shoebox rooms, and we put up with that because we spent all of our time at the workplace and not in our house. And all of a sudden we had 6 people working in 1 room, and that house was not designed for that. It wasn't designed for 6 young people having confidential conversations all in the same space all at once. So I think it's a great opportunity to really think about that, because it also made us realize, it's actually nice to work from home. And if I had a space that catered to it, how awesome would that be? But I'm not at that stage in my life where I feel like that's affordable or feasible, unless you move out into the country. And by the time you've done that, we've all come back to the city and it's too late, you know?
It is interesting in terms of demand, because we've always had this conversation that once you get beyond 1 or 2 bedrooms, like there's no market. And I think maybe one aspect of this conversation is there's a market now for multiple rooms, so people can work from home as well. Before we go to questions, one relatively big question, and I see whether you can formulate some answers quite quickly. But what we've been talking about is short-term things. And Jared, you began by saying that anyone who tells what's going to happen after 5 years doesn't know what they're talking about. Except you are in the business of building buildings that should last for 30 to 50 or 100 years. That's what architecture has to endure. So we have this temporal question around how do we deal with these two different realities? Buildings that have to last for generations, and work strategies that can't really be planned for more than 2 or 3 years. What's the golden answer to that question?
Adaptability and flexibility. I mean, you look at the great buildings that we're reusing now, the warehouses, they were built in a way that allowed them to be used because they weren't too specific. And I think that's one of the things that when we do start thinking about the next generation of buildings, we have to keep that in mind.
Right. Jill, do you have a thought on adaptability, particularly office versus house, and how we...
I guess something that's really important, I think, is probably the danger of universality. And there is something about even a high-rise building that has a residential flavour is different to a building that has a commercial flavour. And depending what the context is, we're always looking for, a good architect will always look at the context in which they're building. And if you're building in Abbotsford, there's a whole lot of industrial buildings that you might respond to. The danger with universality, which is different to adaptability, is, what do we end up with? And the danger is, do we end up with the absolute adequacy of the ordinary, that could be an office, it could be an apartment, it could be a house or something. How do we achieve excellence, and how do we achieve beauty and quality if everything's universal? And so there is some danger attached to it, I think.
Sure.
I don't know what it looks like.
Yeah. And not to go into the full story, but certainly, as we discussed previously, there are lessons to be learned in previous retrofitting of offices for residential that weren't always perfect. Daniel, is that question of adaptability something that your clients are looking to as well, like in terms of what is a work environment and what might be something else, if needs be?
Look, yeah, absolutely. It's and I don't think it's I don't think it's new that's come out of COVID. I mean, there's been such speed of change. If you look at the top companies in the world, they weren't the top companies 5 years ago. It's turning over. People, industries are being disrupted. There's had to be a level of adaptability for a very long time, and so it's finding this balance between space driving function versus actually building space that's functional in different ways. I'm working with a client at the moment, and you could split them down the middle. Half of them want to work in a particular way, and the other half want to work in a completely opposite way. But they don't actually need dramatically different spaces. What they need is the behaviours and the operations to be able to adapt that space to the way they're going to work. So there's a marriage there between operations, design, and adaptability.
Okay, thank you very much. At the risk of pushing everyone's patience, because we are a little bit running over time, but I do think we have to have a few questions. So, do we have a question out in the audience, and do we have a roving mic to handle it? I'm not sure. Any questions? There must be an insightful question out there. Oh. Hold on a second.
So, something that I do is change management, and at the end of the day, change is about people. So, what's the opportunity for organisations to focus on the people to allow them to come back to the office. So I think COVID has accelerated existing flexible working options that a lot of organisations already had, and it mandated that for a lot of people, and then some people who got the taste of it have thought, oh, this is actually good. So the challenge now for organisations is how do they bring them back when they may have it better at home? What's the opinion here?
What's the honeypot? How do you attract the bees back?
Well, it goes back from my perspective, and what we found in the research is that it comes from making that compelling space that people need to go to, people want to go to. And I talked a lot about, the workspace has some unique advantages over all the other spaces. It's really good for this social and interactive and the like. But, organisations are whole things, and we've got to be able to adapt to the people that don't have a place to focus. We've got to adapt to the people that just find it hard to self-motivate. So it's not like, you go in and everything's one theme. It goes back to the what's in it for me, and providing something that addresses that inertia and makes people get out of bed and take their pyjamas off and do the trip in, because there's enough in it. And as I said, I think this just doesn't just apply to workplaces, it's got a broader application. The what's in it for me has got to be addressed in how you think about how you design, build, operate your spaces.
Brandon, can I just briefly, can I ask you, so take the work environment out of it. You've got plenty of office space at home, and it's a wonderful place to work. So for you, if that was the case, what are the key things? You've got an employer who says, what can I do for you to bring you back into the city? What do they do?
Well, definitely donuts, for sure. And I also think having positive face-to-face interactions, like having that energizing, really uplifting, positive collaboration with someone, whether it's one-on-one or with a room of people, I think it's, leaving and going, oh, I'm so grateful for that piece of, interaction or that feedback I got, or I'm really grateful for that person that was able to kind of look me in the eyes and have a debate with me about something, and not it be this constant, churning through Zoom to Zoom to Zoom. And having that support network, not just, that they're there to call, but having them around you, that physical feeling, I think is, it's something that you can't fake at home. You need it, in person. So I think that would probably be the top.
It's an old-fashioned way of saying that good management.
Yes, exactly.
Jared, you're going to say something.
What I was going to say was, even before COVID, we would talk about what makes a great workplace, and they were things like variety and choice, and being able to pick the space that worked for me. There were other things around the workspace with hyper amenity, which kind of a space that's more like a hotel. Things like wellness, and what we're saying is actually those are as important now as they were then, and that's what's going to drive people to come back, is that unique proposition.
There was something that you said that I think is often not really well understood, and that is that support piece. We've sort of talked like you can define, when you talk about collaboration and interaction, everyone thinks of those sort of flash rooms that you're in and you can do it. But there are roles like, say, call centre roles who are dealing with difficult customers who really want that support. They get off a call and they want to debrief with people around them, and they want people to gather around and say, yeah, that wasn't right, or, and support them. So it's not as obvious. You actually have to really dig deep to understand all those different roles and what they need. So it's not all about the flashy interactions, but sometimes it's about, the people around you.
Do we have another question? Yes, over there. Well, hold.
I was curious on your opinions about the fact that while we were all
Up.
while we were all at home, you found communities starting to take over their local golf course, those choices and sort of allowing people and trusting people to do whatever it is they have to do work. I'm just curious as to what your view is on businesses now that don't embrace this opportunity to, truly kind of trust their workforce and give them all the choices, because they've had that now for a year and they're not going to come back and just be told what to do and what days they have to do. And, I think it's a kind of like, I sort of think it's similar to the women's electoral lobby when, all the women got liberated and all the men didn't. There's this kind of sort of possibility that businesses will get left behind.
Could I add a layer to that, which is I think that a lot of what we're talking about at the moment, as you said, is a certain white-collar worker and with kind of their own kind of internal ambition and do well, etc. And there's a certain kind of momentum or motivation that goes with that. It is a good question as to how trust works when that's not all in place. And I think maybe we could make assumptions around certain workers or older workers or whatever, what they do. But as a more broad kind of question, how do you think the state of trust is between employers and employees in that context?
With the work from home experience during COVID was a great step forward. Previously, people had sort of talked about working from home because you had something else to do. It was part of that flexibility. Only certain groups did it. People were always a bit dubious about whether you're working or you're doing something else. It legitimised that actually, firstly, it proved, and I should have said, if people are interested in the white paper, let me know and I'll get it to them. Consistently, and this is not just our survey, productivity was high. I think it really has changed that trust relationship hugely because we were forced in this experiment and, hey, the world didn't end when we all got sent home overnight. Quite amazing.
And in some cases, productivity lifted.
Absolutely.
Any other comments on that?
My only comment would be that it has been a short time and that opinions change, right? So it could be that in another year we take another survey and we find that could actually fall because all of a sudden we're finding that that's no longer the case. So I think it's just one of those things that you have to kind of constantly be wary of a bias that just because I had one data point that's going to be always the case.
Yeah. I think maybe just one last question before we wrap up. Do we have one last question? Out there? Oh, maybe not. Maybe the food trolley over there. Oh no, we have a question. The food trolley can wait for a few more minutes.
Hi, I was just wondering how much impact you think building a sense of community within commercial precincts makes a difference to people wanting to return to the office. So not just what your company offers, but your business place or the building in which your business is based. So what can that building, like the contribution that building makes to activations and community events and bringing people together, what's the impact of that on returning to the city?
Who wants to pick up that one?
I could touch on that a little bit because I think that's what I think is really important. I mean, the conversation we've just had about the issues of trust and relationships and contact, in my mind, are actually about a business's culture. And I think that could exist whether you're in a remote building somewhere else or in the CBD or in one of the satellite kind of ideas. So I think that is largely to do with, do you have a really great culture of support and something, are you a magnet for the people who want to work for you? Outside of that, which I guess interests me more, is what are the elements that attract people to you as an organisation. So you've got your cultural fit, you've got a great office culture, a great all of those good things. But if your building is located in a precinct, a place, I mean, this is where Melbourne has just blossomed over the past few decades because, you know, if you're located in Little Collins Street, you're part of Little Collins Street. If you're located in Flinders Lane, you're part of Flinders Lane. And there are these, and I'd go so far as to say if you're located in Abbotsford, you're part of something that takes place there. If you're in Paran, you're part of that. If you're in St Kilda, you're part of a St Kilda culture. So I think Melbourne has a very interesting network of, I mean, I'm only talking in a city in some ways, and possibly Box Hill is the same, Sunshine's probably the same, Clayton's probably the same. So Melbourne does have these very interesting, you know, if you use the Paris model, arrondissements of different cultural focus and support. And I think that can really work if you locate your enterprise, if you've got something to do or something to contribute to that culture. You know, you may not be the right business to be located in Box Hill if you look at all the other supplementary and complementary businesses that are in Box Hill. So there is very much something about your locale, your product, your delivery, what you do, and those that are located around you, because there is, synergies are critical. And I think that's what makes a city great.
To your question, we've talked a bit about pull factors and push factors. Commuting is one of those factors that's never going to be enticing in coming to the office. But precinct we found was. So it does go beyond the organisation. So the building committee you're talking about, the precinct that it's around, the services that it provides, all really important draw cards. It's a matter of, as I said, getting that balance and that compelling piece happening.
Yeah, I was just going to say that when we look at the activities that we think the future office really is going to be about, that lends itself to a model of building that's much more extroverted and engaging with the city. And, you know, there's already some examples around Melbourne of lobbies that have been converted to workspaces and really successfully. And I think that what we will see is just an evolution of that, really, that there's the potential to have spaces that are more open to the street and, you know, permeable buildings. So yeah, that's
very good. Well, I think we probably have called to a close our conversation for tonight. It's been a very enjoyable night. I feel like it could go off in lots of directions around precincts, around, we haven't even got to the role of the public sector really, and I think there's a big conversation to be had about that. So there's a larger conversation to keep having, and this is just the beginning of it. I'd like to, please join me in thanking our four speakers, Brenna, Daniel, Jill, and Jared. And I would also like to thank Dexus for sponsoring tonight, and I'd also like to thank the MPavilion Foundation for setting this up, and Sam for being so generous in his time with putting this together. Thank you very much.